relationship. Even though the years when your kids are small is a beautiful time of life filled with magical moments, it can also be a time when couples struggle to stay connected. After all, your kids need a lot of your time, but so does your business or your career. And making time for self care is hard, so your health and well being suffers. And date night? Well, that seems like a distant dream. So instead of days filled with love and connection, there are moments of tension, stress, and worry. But what if there was help to get you through these years? A solution built with young parents in mind. One with no difficult concepts to master. One that's fun and gives immediate results. And fits seamlessly into your schedule no matter how busy you get. A solution to make sure you stay connected. We're offering you support to keep your connection strong. The Connection app for couples. Click the link below to learn more. We're making together better so your moments stay magical.
Are you currently in a toxic relationship and unsure what the next day will bring? Have you often wondered if there's more to life than this? Do you suffer from self-esteem issues that you've had since you were a young child? Have issues or have difficulty speaking with your family? Do you feel surrounded by self-centered people? Seems as though you're always giving and they're always taking. If you've answered yes to any of these questions, you need some answers. The 10-day
Notification. Okay, ready, go.
Are you currently in a toxic relationship and unsure what the next day will bring? Have you often wondered if there's more to life than this? Do you suffer from self-esteem issues that you've had since you were a young child? Have issues or have difficulty speaking with your family? Do you feel surrounded by self-centered people? Seems as though you're always giving and they're always taking. If you've answered yes to any of these questions, you need some answers. The 10-day challenge to live your true life gives you the knowledge and techniques for creating boundaries in your life that help us to deal with family, as well as dealing with those narcissistic and toxic people in your life. It offers the insight into understanding and overcoming your self-esteem issues, and to begin to see for the first time your amazing value. You owe it to yourself to find the power within you. Welcome back, friends. Ashley Burgess here today. And today we're going to have a live discussion about marriage, about relationships, long-term relationships that happen to be, well, sexless. A lot of folks are in marriages, long-term relationships where there is no longer any sexual activity. And if there is, there might be very little. And there's a large population of folks who are dealing with that. And so on today's show, Rnold Smith is joining me. He's joining me by Skype. He is the creator of the Connection app, which is an app that's used by couples and individuals to get to understand the relationships better, to encourage that love dynamic, to really kind of refocus ourselves on our relationships. Because I know that a lot of you out there, hey, we got a lot going on. We got work, some of us have kids, work, putting them through school, doing all these things. There's so many different components on a day-to-day life that relationships can be a little overwhelming. Rnold, it's great to have you today. How are you doing?
Great, Ashley. Thanks for having me on.
It's interesting. We talked about this a little bit before the Sunday syndicated show. We were talking about seasonal affective disorder, SAD, and we were talking about that specific subject matter and the challenges of the holidays. That live broadcast that was live syndicated will actually be up here on YouTube and Facebook here in the next few days if you missed the live show. But, we got off the air and we were talking about the concept of how many folks are in sexless marriages. And I think it's more prominent than we want to talk about. I think it's something that a lot of us are ashamed about. I think it's something that people feel bad about. I think that people feel like it takes away from their womanhood or their manhood. How do you think a lot of people are dealing with this? Because I find that it's something that's not talked about.
Oh, I totally agree, Ashley, and I think that's one of the big challenges is how do you actually fix something if you don't acknowledge it or or really say that it's broken. And I think that's kind of how a lot of people deal with it, is they just kind of ignore it, and they go, well, they look at all the other good things in their life. They say we got good communication, we're good partners, there's all kinds of other great things. So we'll just set that aside, and I guess that's just the way it is. And I think it's sad that that's the case, but I think a lot of people deal with it that way.
I think you're right, because I think a lot of times there's a lot of folks out there that have great relationships. I mean, for the most part, they're great best friends with their spouse. They get along. They don't fight. There's not verbal arguments. There's no fighting. There's not a lot of dissension. They get along during certain things, but it seems like the sex life, that intimacy, it doesn't have to just, it's not all about sex. It seems like the intimacy has really been lost in the shuffle. And I think it's the easiest thing to kind of fall off the calendar, so to speak, because it's a long-term relationship. I mean, come on, we can paint the picture for everybody. You're in it for 20, 25 years, 30 years, some of you 10, some of you 15, some of you 7 years. The 7-year itch, you're already like, but it's like you get to that point where I think a lot of people let it slide. And I think to flip the script kind of side of it, I think many people that are in that situation might have been in a relationship previous to the marriage where the sex was great, but the relationship had so many problems that they're okay that they have 85% or 90% of everything. They've lost this 10% and they're okay with it, when on the flip-flop, all they had was really the sex and the relationship was volatile.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think a lot of people, and I think that there's a difference. Some people are just like, I'm okay with that. I don't, like they're just happy without sex, and that's great. With no judgment on your relationship. You have the relationship that you want. But I think that the thing that is sad is that there's lots of things that can be done to really address that kind of issue in relationships. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's actually two issues. One is sex, and the other is intimacy. And I think often in our society, we actually group those two together, which is one of the big mistakes. And I think that if you can separate those and work on them independently, then it surprisingly has a profound effect on both. And so I think that's another thing that people do, is they kind of lump those together, which is a bit of an issue.
And I think also there's a lot of kind of shadows and smoke screen and mirrors around sex, because I think one of the things that people think is that they shouldn't have a problem with their sex life. I think that when you're dealing with couples, and I think we can all speak, and I think many people watching it right now can understand that when you're out with a bunch of couples that are all been married, you have a couple of those couples that are always talking about their sex life. They're alluding to comments about, well, we have to leave dinner early because we gotta get home and X, Y, Z. And I think that even adds more of the stress dynamic to the other couples that are at the table that aren't experiencing that. And it's interesting sometimes how the couples who talk the most about their sex life are actually the couples that aren't having any sex, which is also an interesting dynamic I've found. And I've seen it be kind of a split there, like a half and half split. But it is interesting when you have a bunch of couples, it seems like the one that's always talking about having the sex and leaving early and doing all this stuff, later on you find out that, well, it was pretty much a sexless marriage.
Yeah, or they're actually the ones experiencing the most marital issues. They may have this fiery, passionate relationship, but yet they don't actually have. Then they break up, and you go, well, I thought they were so in love. They looked so connected, but yet they just had different issues. And I think that's again where you kind of get into that difference between sex and intimacy. Having a great relationship and having a great sex life are two different things. They require different investments. And so if you're good at one, you might not be good at the other. And I think that it's so great to actually highlight both of those things, to really understand how do you make sure you have the great communication, you can build the trust, you can have the intimacy, then also how can you make sure that you have a great sex life? And I agree with you. It's hard for people to talk about it. Like you bring it up in a conversation and instantly people get squeamish. I mean, there's so many things that in our society where it's not okay to talk about that. We can talk about all kinds of other stuff, but it's still one of those taboo subjects. especially among polite conversation. And I think that's kind of an issue because you really have nowhere to go to kind of get the answers you want.
And I think it's interesting too how there's a lot of people, a lot of couples who seem to fall into this type of pattern. We hear about couples that break up because of, irrevocable differences. We hear about folks that, that the sex was a component but nothing else was working. But I find that a lot of folks, they have a marriage that, the foundation is good. Okay, the foundation is good. They care about one another. They love each other. But it's almost like they've fallen into kind of this I'm too much of a friend of yours to want to have sex with you dynamic. And I think that's one of the biggest things. It's interesting how people can have sex with somebody they barely know, right?
Yeah.
But then when it comes to the dynamic of having sex with their spouse, is it because it's become boring? Is it because they can have it whenever? Or is it because that they've grown so close to this person that it almost feels taboo to get what they want sexually in the bedroom and be able to keep that connectivity, that friendship, you might say, in the rest of the relationship?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's all of those things, but I agree with you. I think there are a certain number, and I think this probably affects more men than women, where they are precious. This is my wife I'm talking about here. This is my angel. I can't, there's some things that I'm not allowed to do with her that I might be able to do with someone else. And I think it's really that dual. It's kind of a battle for some guys to really say, well, I want to have all this great relationship. I want to have this great sex life, but I have to put my wife on this pedestal. She deserves respect. She deserves to be honored. She deserves to be cherished. But at the same time, on the sex side, well, that's not always the same thing. And so how do you reconcile that? I think that can be a challenge for some people. And so then what happens is there's a resistance, an inner resistance to doing that. And I think that is a real problem for many guys, and maybe women out there. I don't have that personal experience with women because I'm not one, but I think there's probably some of that out there too.
And I think I like what you're saying on that, especially with the men. And I see that. I think with the women, more often than not, I think that a lot of women, I feel like, I guess what I'm saying is that a lot of women, it's convenient for them to say they're not in the mood, or it's convenient for them to say, yeah, not tonight, or whatever, I don't feel right, or don't feel good, or I have a headache, or whatever that is that you feel, that whatever you create the script of to get out of it. But I think it's either insecurity, I think it's also maybe some body shame, maybe not feeling, maybe even body dysmorphia, maybe not feeling right about one's body. I also feel too that I think men and women go back to the old school playbook a lot, right? So they had great sex with somebody, maybe the relationship was horrific, and they both would have killed themselves basically. Killed each other, not physically, but basically mentally. And I think a lot of people go back to that playbook and they think about that sex on a constant basis, or they relive that, or they think about that, and they don't feel like they have that with their significant other. And I also feel that more women than not, maybe, and maybe even some men out there as well. I'm not dividing up the sexes on this, but I think that there's a lot of sexual dysfunction based on the way that we were taught about sex, or the sexual abuse that might have been a situation in the formative years, or even in the teens, or even in the 20s, that people didn't deal with. And so there's this taboo thing around sex that has a tendency of, I'm going to avoid that feeling, okay, or I'm going to avoid that emotion, or I'm going to avoid that encounter.
I agree. You said so much there, and I think that that's one of the big challenges with this issue, is it is very complex, and that's why this is a series, because really to unpack this, you're going to be in different places, but this is a real opportunity for you to really look and see, what is it for me? Sometimes it's just stress. Sometimes you have, something that you're resentful. Sometimes it's, as you say, you kind of have some trauma that's unresolved. And when you can really highlight that, then you can know what to do. But oftentimes we just go, I'm not even going to look at it. And that's, I think, the big issue, because, my TED Talk, I talk about being resigned. And resigned is the unresisting acceptance of a probable future. And when we look at our relationship and how it's been going and say, well, for the past couple of years, we've been having sex maybe once or twice a year or hardly ever. And I guess that's just my relationship now. And when you accept that, then you think, then that's it. That becomes your life sentence. And I think that's the tragedy, is that when you really stop and say, actually, what can I do about this? But as you say, it's complex. And so sometimes when you start to wade in, it can feel really overwhelming. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking all that with you so people can kind of have a roadmap to getting to where they want to go. And I just want to go back to that intimacy thing just for 1 second, because there's a definition of that which I think is fantastic and really simple. The definition of intimacy is just being known. And I think that what happens in relationships, you talk about when you're together for a while, you get into just a habit and you think that you know the person, you stop seeing them as they are today, and you see them as they've been over the past 5, 10, 15 years. And so you don't see them as fresh. You don't see them newly. And I think one of the great things that you can do in your relationship is really try and tune into your partner as who they are right now. Because in any relationship, they're going to go through an evolution, whether it be a year or 5 years or 10 years. I've known my wife 19 years. We've been married for 14 years. And so she's a very different person now than she was, when I first met her, or even 5 years ago. And the beautiful thing is, if I can discover who she is now, then it creates a real great, beautiful moment. But I think oftentimes we just get stuck in that rut.
I agree with you. And I find that our society, right? I find that a lot of folks, and I feel like Hollywood and entertainment and everything, makes it interesting to be. It's that interesting, that new love, that new connection, that new, right? It's like the car smell, the new car smell. It's new, right? And so everybody wants that new thing. And I think a lot of us have a tendency of taking for granted what we do have, and I think it's more. I'm not saying it's all women out there and no men, but I think more women than not get more, I guess just kind of over it. Like they don't really know, it's kind of like the elephant in the room. They think about it all the time, but yet they're not doing anything to change it. And it seems like both people are trying to do something. Neither one is united in their calling to figure this out. And I think both people kind of sit with that thought in their head, like, wow, I wonder when we're going to have sex again. It's been kind of a long time. And so you have that stress building up as well, right? And then that actually kind of takes you out of the game altogether, because you're already building up the stress. The level of stress is already building up. And I think it causes even more, and I'm not saying that we're having PTSD over this thing. Maybe some people are. But I think it actually causes us to stress ourselves right out of doing it. And then the next thing you know, you're trying to get set up to do that. And I think as we get older and the longer you're married, longer in a relationship, it really does become like this penciled in thing. Like we have to schedule it like a meeting. And it's weird how that is. Because I get it. I've fallen into the trap before where, remember when we all were in the first beginnings of the relationship and everything was fun and exciting, and well, you had sex, not a big deal. There was nobody penciling in a thing. Nobody was like, I think Sunday at 6 p.m. works. Let's pencil it in. Don't pin it in right now. But it's interesting how we fall into those guidelines of having this restricted thing around something that was very free. That's now not very free at all, it seems.
Yeah, and I totally, it's true. And sometimes, in my own life with my wife, obviously you have kids, you go through phases. And there's times when, you get stressed and it feels like trying to find your way back to that connection. Seems like you don't even know where to start. Like you see her, she's right there across the bed, and it's like, I want to reach out to her. I want to, do something with her, but it feels like there's this, canyon in between you. You go like, how do I cross that? There's this, how do I get in there? And I think that's a really natural thing that happens in relationships. And, a lot of, I think sex is kind of use it or lose it, I think so for some people, it really works to just have that kind of schedule and, just make it happen regardless, because it does keep that connection alive a little bit. Now, of course, but you don't want to have like a duty-bound sex life. You want to have a sex life that's alive and vibrant and exciting and fulfilling for everybody. But at the same time, you also want to make sure that you're just still staying committed to that. So I mean, but I get it. Like that's life. Sometimes that it seems like it's a chasm to cross, and you don't know, you don't have a bridge.
It's very true, and I think there's so many different. So part of the series we're going to be talking about, I think, reasons why men have issues in the marriage with having sex, not having sex. We want to talk about women and the issues that women face. We want to talk about the psychological component of all this, okay? Because the psychological component of wanting sex, not wanting sex, the psychological component of dealing with the stress of not having it or feeling like you're stressed to have it. Also the component of, why do things change? As we are closer with somebody, you would think that the normal, natural progression would be to be able to connect better, right? Like you would feel that way. But I found that a lot of couples, it's quite the opposite. It's like they connect on all these different levels. They cook dinner together, they have fun, they do stuff together, they have the same interest. But then when it comes down to it, it's like it's a kiss on the cheek, maybe a peck, maybe a little bit of a kiss, and that's it. And I think there's also some anger. I think there's some resentment, and so I think that we have so much stuff to cover because if you are watching this and you're going through a sexless marriage, sexless relationship, close to sexless, you don't have to be completely sexless, okay? But it's not the same as it was. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of burden that you're carrying. And also, when you're being when you're being honest in the marriage and you're not stepping out of the marriage, you're probably asking yourself, how long are you planning on doing? How long can you plan on doing this? What can you change? Are there some things that you can do to rev up the sex life? I mean, there's all kinds and on this series, we're not going to be talking about the BS. Okay, that a lot of people talk about. They try to say, oh, go on a date night, Oh, come on. I mean, if date night solved everything, come on. It doesn't solve anything, really. It gets people together to hang out, but it doesn't change the fact that there's issues in the bedroom. It just doesn't, right? I mean, what do you think about that, Rnold?
Yeah, it's so true. I think that the answers are complex, but there are things to do. When I was when I first started researching for the Connection app, it was just when my second daughter was born, and our sex life was kind of going down, and it was and I really saw that I wanted to get that honeymoon feeling back. And so one of the things that I found in my research was that there's a small percentage of couples that actually maintain that honeymoon feeling throughout their entire relationship. And I thought, wow, I want that. And so a large part of what I did was like, what are the actions that people do that actually keep that honeymoon feeling alive? And so, not based on like, what Anne, call Anne said, but like, what does the science say really makes a difference? And so that's what I'm excited to share with everybody.
And that's what we want to talk about. And so that's the key, is that I thought that Rnold would be the best person to have on the show, because when you put together that entire concept, you have an entire app for it. You've researched all this, right? I mean, this is where we need to be at. And I've worked with numerous clients dealing with it. I've been married for 16, almost 17 years. I've done a lot of investigation, a lot of stuff and a lot of work on this. So I think together we can really come up not only with why we're in it, how we got there, but ways that we can start overcoming. Is it going to change overnight? Probably not. But there's going to be incremental changes that you can incorporate, and it's going to probably take you a little bit out of your comfort zone, because even if we're uncomfortable, we become comfortable in that zone. So we're going to be talking about this. This is a big subject. This is something that's not solved overnight, but there's a lot of folks who are suffering with this. They love the person they're with, but they would love to have that one part of the relationship, but it just doesn't seem like it's capable of being had. I think it's great.
Awesome.
Rnold, I can't wait to have this discussion and to continue this discussion. Yeah. So we'll be continuing this throughout the next few weeks, and we're going to be talking directly about all these different subject matters and how to really connect with that and understand yourself. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please add some comments to the comment section below. If you have any thoughts, questions, directions, maybe a reason or why you feel men or women feel a certain way, or maybe a personal stance, so we can address that appropriately. And in the future shows, we're going to be taking questions as well. We're going to be taking questions, we're going to both be answering these questions, and we're going to help everybody to the best of our ability to get some answers. Arnold, lasting thoughts for today?
It starts with just really loving your partner, and I know that seems kind of trite and simple, but just keep trying to see who your partner is today, and see if you can discover something that you love about them every moment, or each day at least. And if you do that, it's a good start.
Awesome. I totally agree with Arnold. We'll be back here the next few weeks. We'll be doing this for quite some time, so we're going to dedicate pretty much this month to addressing this, because I know for anybody out there that's dealing with it, it's a big deal. And
it's our Christmas present to you.
I know, it's the time for giving. So we want everybody to get and give, and so we're going to help out with that. So Arnold, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next week and us working on this. And everybody in the meantime, please comment in that comment section. Let us know what's important to you and some things that you want us to address, because we want to make sure that we address those thoughts and those questions so that we can communicate, connect, and make this a really solid community. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week, and don't forget to live your true life. You can't miss the newest show, The Artist Perspective, sponsored by Art for Your Cause. To learn more about Art for Your Cause, go to artforyourcause.com. Art for Your Cause helps artists and charities by bringing artists and their work and charities together to be able to raise money for your favorite charities while still paying the artists for their work. To learn more about The Artist Perspective, go to theartistperspective.tv and watch our first episode featuring world-renowned photographer Jeremy Locke.